Welcome everyone to this week's edition of the BigFooty Bombercast. I'm your other regular co-host, the Grizz, and here with me this week is not Bonta, but it's our other recurring guest host from last week, Fair Bump Play On. How are you, mate?
G'day, Grizz. I'm very good. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. It's been a couple of weeks since I was on the pod. Apologies to everyone that we didn't get one out last week. Life circumstances prevented us from being able to get one together, but we're here post ANZAC Day after what was a really weird game. I don't know about you, mate, but it was a weird roller coaster of emotions. It obviously had that great start, and then the really tight finish, the missed shot by Cole Langford. I'll start with you. How did you feel when the final siren was blown and the game was a draw?
Yeah, you can look, a draw's a draw, but in your heart, you know if you feel like it's a win or a loss, don't you? Even
Yeah,
if it's just by a few percentage points. To me, it felt like a win. I felt like if Langford kicks that goal, there's no guarantee that the Pies don't take it straight out of the middle. I don't think the game was over. I don't think that would have iced it. And even the dropped Elliott chest mark with 5 seconds to go, you could see it coming straight towards him. I thought he was going to sink us again. So I think maybe just the fact that he dropped that and didn't manage to sink the boot into us one last time, that felt like a win to me.
whenever we have a draw, I always feel like it's a loss. I feel like you've left 2 points on the table. But I think particularly the way we started. Now, Collingwood are the sort of team, they started slow through the season, but they're starting to round into a bit more form. They were always going to come back. They did it against Port Adelaide the week before. I think they were also down by 5 goals, but they were up by 3 goals by half time. So at least in that sense, we were able to put a stop to them better than what Port Adelaide did. But yeah, I think with the start we had and we had a bunch of gilt edge opportunities. I just think to a few moments at the game, we had that double 50 at the end of the second quarter that resulted in a point with about 40 seconds left. There's your point. We had Stringer missing from straight in front at the start of the second. That call, like a lot of moments that I just look back and go, oh, maybe that's the difference. But I'm sure Collingwood would probably have the equivalent of
I think
miss shot. Yeah, miss shot. I think
yeah.
Brady Mychek had about two out in the falls and a couple of really obvious sitters that he missed. He had that one banana that came off the side of his foot that almost went out of bounds on the fall to the other side of the goal. So both teams would probably say they missed chances, which is always a case in a draw, isn't it? It's just 1 point. But I think from a flow of the game perspective, if you look at the raw stats, like we should have won that game by 5 goals. Like I think we had almost 80 more disposals. We had 17 more clearances, including 11 more centre clearances. The marks we won by almost 25, 26 contested marks, like all the normal metrics you would sort of point you to say who was on top. We dominated. Yet it was a draw. It was just this weird game where if we seemed to have the clearances sorted, but as soon as the ball got on the outside, Collingwood was just cutting us to pieces with their run.
I think they're at their best, they're just super efficient, aren't they? And
Yeah.
and going in, we knew that if they could take the ball off us with lots of turnovers, they really could carve us up. And you mentioned that surge back from Collingwood and the Stringer missed goal after quarter time. Could have been such a great moment, particularly because he won a holding the ball, putting De Goey on the ground, 15-meter penalty. Just it would have been a great start to the second quarter, but didn't happen. And then, Collingwood had kicked five and got a goal in front of us with maybe 6 or 7 minutes to half time. And there was a bit of a deja vu feeling. There's so often a team starts well against them and they get going. And, I think we'd had that feeling of being run over them last year, obviously later in the game, but all the signs were there that we could roll over, and the Essendon of a lot of the last few years would have rolled over. So I think a lot to take out of the way that we're gritting it out and sort of being able to stop momentum of other sides this year. It's not something we've really seen a lot of, and it's pretty heartening.
Yeah, and I think Collingwood are probably the best momentum side in the competition in the sense that when both teams have periods of momentum, and I think coaches talk about this all the time, where both all teams have periods of momentum, but I think Collingwood's probably the best at taking full toll of it when they get it. And I think that's probably what you meant by that they're just so efficient. To your point, I don't think they kicked more than 3 goals in a row all game, which is really
Yeah.
rare for a Collingwood game. Normally, when they get momentum and they get really kick-started on how they want to play, they can slam 5, 6, 7 goals on you pretty quick, And I think they kicked 3 or 4 in a row, maybe 3 in a row in that second quarter, but otherwise it was sort of goal for goal the entire game. And for a neutral, it would have been fascinating to watch. But for poor Essendon Collingwood fans, you're probably sitting there pulling your hair out.
Oh, and so many. Oh, sorry. I was just going to mention those Maya check misses. That's really unusual for him. He's a great finisher, and maybe sometimes those snaps are a point, but so often they're a goal. So I think you're right that both sides would have had, everyone would have gone home thinking of lots of moments that could have been different. But in a way, it felt like the game almost felt destined to be a draw because there's just so many chances on both sides. And, a point the difference at halftime, a point the difference at three-quarter time. And it just kept coming back to the middle, didn't it?
Yeah, I think if both sort of teams walk away feeling like it was a loss, then the draw was probably an appropriate result. Normal,
Yeah.
like both teams go, "Oh yeah, we really stuffed it." There's
I
multiple
think I,
opportunities we had to win, and we didn't. I think a draw is probably an appropriate result in the end.
I think so, and I think my maybe my optimism's coming from expecting the worst, and then when you don't get it, it feels okay.
Yeah. So we'll talk about some individual performances now. And I thought, Zach Merritt obviously stands above as sort of the Anzac Day medalist. He was outstanding all game. He led with, 9 tackles, 30 disposals. And he was a colossus all game, 6 clearances, which is second only to Jakey Stringer. But he had his own kicking issues in front of goal. Like he didn't kick one goal through. I just thought Zach was really good as a leader, leading from the front. He's really growing into that captaincy role where, it's funny, a few years ago he wasn't in a leadership group. Now he's being talked about as maybe the best captain in the AFL as an upfront leader. It was great to see him perform on such a big day after missing obviously last year.
He's not missing out often, is he? And one of the great things about him this year is just incredible consistency. Defensively, yeah, he's making 9 tackles, but a lot of them he's sticking hard tackles that are really changing momentum. So it's not just the number; it's the nature of the tackles he's making. It's really inspirational, and he's been incredibly clean for a long time, but he is super damaging by foot, and yeah, he's very impressive. Obviously, Stringer, played a lot more midfield time this week. I think Scott had a really good day out, and that was one of the little changes from previous weeks, as well as chucking Martin forward late in the game, which worked well. But Stringer had a really good game, and I think if it was 3-1 instead of 1-3, he's a chance for the medal. And the other name that I'm really pleased to see is McGrath. He had a really good game as well, and probably would have been a medal contender too. There's been a lot of knocks on his disposal, but if you take history out of it and you're just watching him, he's a bit like a new man. This year, he's really carving teams up at times, both with his agility and ability to kind of find space and when he's got the ball, but also his disposal's been really good too. So I thought he had a great one.
Yeah, I thought he was immense. I said in the game day thread that up until 3/4 time, he might have been our best player. And there was some unbelievable efforts in that third quarter when we were under siege. There was this 5 minute period of play where it seemed like every time the ball went forward for Collingwood, he was 2v1 and he was still managing to intercept or cut the ball off. He's been good all year. He had an excellent game against the Bulldogs. I thought the game against Port Adelaide, he was below par, but name a player that wasn't in that game against Port Adelaide. Otherwise, I've got this running theory. He's a smoky for the All-Australian squad at this point as a halfback. His disposal numbers are high. His reverse Coleman numbers. He's not getting a lot of goals kicked on him, and he's doing so much of the team defense stuff of chopping out and helping his teammates. You generally have to be like this for a couple of years, and then you get the All-Australian on your second year. So I don't know if he will, but I feel like if you're doing an All-Australian team at the first half, the first third of the season, he would have to be in consideration at halfback at the very least. And another guy who had a really good game, who has been much maligned maybe over the last couple of seasons. I thought, and we don't talk too much about him, but Dyson Heppel had a really solid game back there, I thought. And he was
Yeah, well,
one. We had guys like Jake Kelly and Jaden Laverty had some really iffy moments with the ball and just in terms of panicking or disposal. Whereas he seemed always to be calm, and that's the one thing with Dice, I suppose, is his experience means he's he might be slower, he might lose his feet, but he's always composed when he does get the football.
what was it, 27 touches at 96% efficiency. And yeah, on Laverde and Kelly, I always feel like when you're seeing dumb 50s, it's kind of a sign of a muddled head.
Yeah.
Kelly gave, you mentioned the double 50. We're lucky that Frampton is Frampton and sprayed that one, but it could have been super costly. It was just at that terrible time. So yeah, Heppel, his last few weeks have been even better. He started the year pretty well. I think he looked totally cooked last year, and it's a pretty amazing story if he can keep this up across the season, which I guess is that's a challenge when you're his age to just sort of play, get 20 games out at that level. We'll see if he can do that, but at the moment he's really flying. So it'll be interesting. Do you reckon? I know we'll talk about Perth in a second, but it will be interesting to see if he makes the journey.
Yeah, I think on form, I don't. There are other defenders I dropped before Dyson Heppel, which is a remarkable ball turnaround from last year. Whereas this time last year, I think seniority was really the only thing keeping him in the team, to be honest. And you can criticize that or support that as much as you want, but I think on form he definitely holds his spot at the moment. The other guy we have to talk about who was really good, and I don't want to hear anything about the last shot on goal, is Kyle Langford. Yeah, and when I say I don't want to hear anything, we can talk about it, but I'm really not interested in any sort of large scale criticism of Kyle's last shot. He just sometimes you miss, and we saw that with Brody Mychek, and we saw that at multiple times in the game. He still kicked 4 goals too. I think he's the biggest mismatch in the competition at the moment. And when I say that, actually, it's probably second only to Jeremy Cameron in the sense that you put a tall on him and he moves so well, he loses them in space. But you put a small on him, he's such an outstanding contested mark for his size. And you saw there were a couple of times that steel side bottom or, Isaac Quainer was stuck on him in a one-on-one and they just couldn't go with him in terms of a contested marking situation. So he's in great form. I think he's top 5 or 6 in the Coleman at the moment with 17 goals. He's just been an absolute revelation up forward for the second year in a row. And I know he missed that shot right at the end to put us in front, but I think all in all, we still had a fantastic day. And if he'd kicked it, he's probably pipping merit for the ANZAC medal.
Always a big day out in a game like that, isn't it? And 5 obviously would have been pretty special. But you're right. He had a fairly ugly game against Adelaide, which was incredibly unusual. He's been in incredibly consistent form, and just when the ball is near him, he's just one of those players you feel like you can trust at the moment. He's a good size. He's a strong guy. I think, there's a lot of knocks on the coaching decisions to try and push him through the midfield for a period of time. We're seeing how good he is as a forward, and I think a lot of people always knew that. I would say that the time he spent in the midfield doesn't feel wasted. I think it's probably made him a more well-rounded player. He's very good when the ball's on the ground. So I feel like, we're probably getting the start of, from last year, hopefully a good 4 or 5 year patch where he is really dominant in the competition. So it's a great asset to have in the mix when you put him in that, between the talls and the smalls in our forward line, because you're right, he can be very dangerous, hard to match up on, and yeah, I'm sure a lot of teams are putting a fair bit of thought into him.
So we are very tall in our forward line, and one thing that Stringer and Jones and Langford can all do is they're all quite mobile, and they do put pressure on, which you have to, in order to take advantage of that size difference, you have to be able to put pressure on, and you have to be mobile. You have to be able to use the ball at ground level, and that's, I think, where what you were saying before, the midfield time isn't wasted. He's just so comfortable in congestion. He's just so comfortable, ball in hand, running away and towards goal. He's just such a really potent, and him and Jake play very similar roles in that regards. Jake probably plays a bit more midfield on the weekend, like he indicated, with 8 clearances, which I was sort of shocked to see that number post the game. 8 clearances is a lot. It was
Big
twice
day out, isn't it?
Yeah, twice as many as the next Collingwood player, as the best Collingwood player. We've got Jake's with 8. Zach with 6, Darcy with 5, who I thought had a solid bounce back game after a poor night against Adelaide. Our midfield's really got on top of Collingwood was the reason we got on top. And, we won't talk about Durham and Caldwell, or we can if you want, but I thought Durham and Caldwell were, again, good and solid and did some really good defensive jobs on Pendlebury and to go at different points.
The only thing I want to say about Durham is what a pleasure it is to see him mark overhead.
Oh,
Beautiful,
yes.
beautiful to watch. I know we don't want to, we've talked a lot in previous weeks about the impact those guys are having this year, so don't need to go back over that, but it's just a beautiful thing to watch. And probably the only other guy I kind of want to reflect on from the Collingwood game, Sam Draper. Yeah, he got caned after Adelaide. Obviously had a dog of a night there, and it hadn't been a great period. I thought he did bounce back to still Sam Draper, still some highs and lows, but took a few marks down the line, which is, it's so good to see. It's so important. I think if he's doing that, it changes the game a bit for us, and kicked an important goal at a time when we really needed one. And yeah, I thought he was much better this week.
If that's the Sammy Draper we're getting every week, then I've got no problems with the antics. I've got my thing with Sammy after the Adelaide game was, and I said this multiple times during the game thread, was that the big on purpose uncoordinated, like the purposely uncoordinated Shane Mumford thing is cute when you're doing all the things you need to do. But he wasn't doing any of the stuff he needed to do. He wasn't getting involved around the ground. He was giving away silly frees and 50s, the soccer kicks along the ground that were either not working or going straight to the opposition. Yeah, he put that away on the weekend, and I think he's the sort of guy that he relies on his teammates to tell him where to go. Like I watched on the weekend that you could see the midfielders pointing Sammy to where he needed to get to. Behind the ball and stuff. And I don't mind if he has to do that, as long as he's doing it. If he's willing to listen and say, I need to get behind the ball here. My position in the zone is here. You're always going to have a couple of players that need that sort of help. And even if that's who he is, he does, when he's in, doing the contested marks and he's getting involved and he's throwing his weight around like he was, it's a completely different kettle of fish. And I agree. I thought Draper and Goldstein definitely had the better of the Collingwood rucks on the weekend.
Yeah, for sure, and it'll be interesting to see what we do with them. Wright was okay back from injury, started well, but probably didn't impact across all 4 quarters. And I still have a sneaking suspicion that our best side doesn't have all 3 of them in it. I think there's always a finals-like atmosphere on ANZAC Day, and the pressure just goes up a notch. I think that, it just has a level of intensity, and yeah, it'll be interesting, in the wide open spaces of Data Breach Stadium over at Optus, and it'll be interesting to see. I just feel like there's a chance that with where we are a bit tall in that structure, and a forward pressure probably suffers a little bit. So yeah, it worked as well as it possibly could, probably better than I thought it would, having the 3 of them in there, because they all played their role well. But if one of them's a bit down, then I think we could get exposed on kind of rebound out of our forward 15.
Yeah, well, 2 tackles inside 50 for the game on the weekend. Collingwood, I think Collingwood had 14. They did. So, and our season average is 11. So we're well down. And that's to your point that when you're so tall, that's probably what you sacrifice. And at the start of the game, we were marking everything or getting free kicks because we were so oversized in comparison to them. But once, the ball hit the ground, the ball was coming out at a rate of knots. But that we'll move on to probably just the news of this week and move into the next game, which I think is a good segue, is we've got some troops coming back to the VFL. Elijah Sartis obviously had a big day at disposal-wise. For those who watched the game, accumulation was high. There was probably a question mark over some of the efficiency, but it was good just to see him accumulate and get a run in the midfield. Matt Guelphy had a successful return, and Archie Perkins looks like he's a test for this week with a hamstring. It'd be interesting to see whether they test him on the flight over to Perth with a hammy or whether they just wait for the week after. But what did you think about Did you catch much of the VFL game? And do you think
Yeah.
guys like Guelphy and Sardis and Perkins are a chance to come in this week?
It's great when guys bounce back, go down to the VFL and do what they need to do. I wouldn't be picking Sardis. Like, I think the media's reflex is, oh, this young guy's got dropped and gone and got 40 touches. I don't think the knock on him at AFL level is his ability to get his hands on the ball. I think his composure with it is something that they would be trying to work with him on. And so, I didn't. I'd love to see him play a stretch of weeks where he does get plenty of football, but he also he starts to use it better and show a bit more composure. Because I think that's the thing he's got to learn. So, he may come back. If he does, that's fine. But I would be letting him work on that a bit more. I think team balance is the question, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
whether one of Guelphy or Perkins comes in, I think there's certainly room for that, even if it's just for Hind and they shuffle things a little bit. You've got Alwyn Davey Jr., who shows so much spark, but probably wasn't strong enough in a couple of contests on the weekend. It'll be interesting to see what sort of message they want to send to him, whether that's pull him aside and have a word with him at training, or whether it's a demotion. Personally, I think there's a lot to work with there. He's not sticking tackles, but he is showing, a fair bit of spark, which I think is really bringing something to the side. So I'd probably be persevering with him. I'd personally be maybe shuffling things a little bit and bringing Goldstein out. You mentioned Perkins and Guelphy. I feel like Roberts is on the the verge as well as a youngster, and that name's in the mix. So I'm not sure which way they'll go, but it's nice to have a few options.
I agree with you on Sartis. Not only would I keep Sartis down, I would, and this might be considered blasphemy in some circles, I would almost, not because he's playing particularly poorly, but I think it might be better for his development just for the next month or so. I would actually give Hobbs a run in the VFL as well as a full-time mid. We have been playing as basically a half forward at the moment, and there are a couple of times against Collingwood and indeed in different games where he just didn't take first option and he gets caught with the ball a lot, which is a problem at AFL level. And I feel like that's a skill he can practice and work on at BFL level as a first choice midfielder, where it's not quite as fast and he can just practice that first option giving. And I would wonder if giving him a month of VFL football as a first choice midfielder with Elijah Sardis and your Jackson Haley or a VFL listed mid, just giving them those pure minutes to work on their craft might be better for Ben. And then you can bring in a Guelphy, and I would drop a tall and move Martin forward and bring Roberts into the back line. That would be if I had choice of the magnets this week, that's what I would be doing.
Can we get our hands on the magnets? Can we get in there? Because I'm right on board with your suggestions there, man. I like all of that. I reckon Hobbs had a field day as a kid, just pushing people over, bullying them around on junior footy fields, and I don't reckon he's spent a lot of time giving the first option, and it's holding him back. He's going to be a good player. He's going to be an inside
Absolutely,
midfielder long term. So we're flush with fringe mids at the moment, and we're short on small forwards. So there's a few guys getting into that forward rotation that are doing an okay job, but that's not where their long-term future lies. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'd be in favour of letting him play to his strengths and and probably having a structure that is a bit truer to what we need in the ones.
Yeah, and I think then he can come into the team as a first choice mid as opposed to half forward. I just feel like if he's playing as a high half forward, I'd rather Martin in that role, who when he gets that ball 70 meters out is lethal, as we saw on the weekend. Like, just you don't want him kicking off the last line of defense. You want him kicking inside 50. If you put him in Hobbs's role and you drop a small and bring in a pressure forward like Guelphy, all of a sudden you just seem a bit more mobile and a bit better pressure wise at ground level, which I think is a much better option for our team going forward. And I would sacrifice a ruck. If Draper can't run a full game out, then I'd be playing him at VFL level 90% in the ruck and just saying, get your tank up. Or, if he's tanked up to it, I think, Goldie. He did a great job getting us through the first 8 weeks when Draper was coming back from an injury over pre-season. But now we need to look at, against a lesser opponent in West Coast in theory, let's see if we can ruck Draper for 80% and get 20% chop out from Wright and Jones if we need it.
It's a long flight there and back, and Goldstein's what, 49 years old?
I think he's on the pension. I think
on
he
the
just
pension.
he qualified for the pension this week. So I think maybe just save him the trip over.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, I think it could be good for him and probably the right team balance to take in over there.
Yeah. And I think we're just better, more mobile and better pressure forward, I think, in that case. And if you wanted to consider, if Perkins is back, Perkins, you don't want to make too many changes to a winning team, but I'm just thinking from a structural standpoint, like you said, what's the best look for us going forward? I just don't know. I just wonder if we're too tall at the moment. But that brings us to this week's game against the West Coast Eagles. Don't let the last couple of years for you. They've been in much better form, I think, the last month. They obviously beat Fremantle in the derby. They beat, I can't remember what the full line before that was. They beat Richmond, over in Perth. They had a stinker against Gold Coast in Queensland, but they were competitive against Sydney the week before Richmond. So they've had a pretty solid month, West Coast. And we're on their home deck. We don't tend to travel to Perth all that well historically. Where do you see this game going? I'm hoping for a 39-point win, and I'll tell you why 39-point win later. But what's a good game against West Coast looking like from you?
I think West Coast, they have players who've had success, and when you see Yob bouncing back, he's a good player and can be really influential. He's had a great little period as they've been going well. I almost think they're in one of those dangerous stages where they don't care too much about their season. I think they're just stoked to be winning a few games. They didn't take Harley Reid to the Gold Coast. It feels like it's all about getting the big crowd at home, everyone coming to the Harley Reid show and having that's like the carnivals back in Perth, I reckon.
Yeah.
So I feel like they'll be ready, cherry ripe and ready to go. I think they didn't perform in Gold Coast. I don't know that matters too much. I think they're going to be particularly dangerous probably for the next 6 to 8 weeks in the season. I would, with their list profile, one of those teams you could see fading out in the last, 6 to 8 games, and it's a shame we don't have them then, because I reckon we're getting them right in the worst time of year to play them, when they've just come into a bit of form and their backs are up. So I think they will come out really ready to go. Their midfield is actually still really competitive, with Yo and Tim Kelly in there as well. So I think it will be a bona fide battle. I'd be very surprised if inside the hangar they're not going west, expecting a really difficult game.
Yeah, West Coast will like their chances against us historically. That even last year when they were really struggling and we were trying to still contend for finals, they just about pipped us at the post. It took an all-time blunder by, I think it was Jeremy McGovern, that resulted in a Kyle Langford goal with about 20 seconds left for us to win the game. So they'll like their chances, and I think that they're very good from stoppage. They score heavily from stoppage, and it's that midfield you talk about. But stoppage has been our one wood this year as well. So if we can get a top in that, I think we'll be able to control the game pretty well. They're not great at stopping teams in transition. They're not great at full ground transition, but they're very good at taking full toll from the stoppage. And Harley Reid, when he's playing, is exactly the type of player to break out the front of the stoppage, and he looks a jet. So I think for me, a 39-point win would be great, because that puts our percentage back to 100. So that would be great. But obviously, I'd rather just the 4 points at this point. The draw basically makes our percentage irrelevant. Yeah, and I would love to see us change a little bit of structure this week, see what it's like with one ruck. But otherwise, my view of this game is just get away with the 4 points and no injuries. Key to the game, I think, it's just the midfield. So we've got a very interesting month coming up I think we've got West Coast obviously this week. We've got GWS after that. I think then North after that, if I'm not mistaken. So a couple of really winnable games. Obviously not the GWS game, but a couple. We could get to the 10 week mark here and be 6-2 and 6-3-1 if we're fair dinkum, which I tipped us for 9 wins this year. If we get to 6 wins by round 10, I'm going to look pretty stupid. But I think this is the sort of game that old Essendon would drop, and I'm really hoping we don't.
It's going to be really telling in that way, isn't it? Because I think, yeah, and week 11's Richmond as well, who are really struggling. So that six could, if things go to plan in the next 4 weeks, we're 7-3-1, and that's a spot we would all be very happy with. But as you say, those late season games to West Coast and North Melbourne last year, where we just scraped by against teams that everyone else was belting. We're trying to get better, right? Trying to go from mediocre to being a really good side, and good sides put bad teams to the sword. And this week, what I'd love to it would be great to get the points, but what I'd love to see is a bit of ruthlessness. And I think if it's close, with that West Coast is gonna be up and about, and the crowd's gonna really get behind them. So yeah, you'd love to take all the chances that we can in the first half and really put a big gap on them and see if we can really avoid getting into a close tussle. It'll be ecstatic if that happens and we manage to sort of stay away from any Essington behaviour over the next month. It'd be great to see, but you have to fear it, Grizz. You have to fear it never feels too far away, that sort of disappointing underperformance. So it'd be interesting. I think in 4 weeks we'll know a lot more about what kind of season we're really in.
Yes, is it fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, fool me 3 times, you're an Essendon fan. So let's just hold off for the next month. It's just an interesting flashpoint, I think, the next 3 weeks, or 4 weeks, as you indicated, with Richmond around 11. So we'll just we'll do our tips and a bold prediction for this week. I'm tipping Essendon by 39 points for the reason indicated, that I think we should win, and it'd be great to get our percentage back to 100. And I think Peter Wright kicks 5. I think he'll like the open Spencers and the fast deck in Perth, and he'll get his kicking boots on. What about you?
Despite saying I'd love to put them to the sword, I reckon we'll win by 10 points. But I was going similarly to you, but I was thinking Jones. I feel like he's had a great little period. I'd love him to cash in with a bag. So I'd like 4 or 5 goals from Harry Jones. I feel like he deserves it, and with a bit of space, he'll run all day, and I feel like he could get on the end of a few.
No worries. Well, that's this week's edition of the Bombercast. Thank you, Fair Bump, for joining us this weekend. For this week, it's been a pleasure.
Absolute pleasure, Grizz. Thanks for having me.
No worries. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Please like, subscribe, and tell your Essendon supporting mates. We'll be back next week, hopefully after another Essendon win. Go Bombers.
Go the Bombers.